Good evening, and a warm welcome to councillors and members of the public to this meeting of the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council. I would be grateful if you could please turn your mobile phones off or switch them to a silent setting during the meeting. It is important that everyone present is aware of the evacuation procedures. On hearing the evacuation alarm bell, which will have a constant ring, you should leave the meeting room at once by way of the nearest signed fire exit route and locate at the front of the town hall. Members of the public and press are permitted to record or film the proceedings this evening. Those that do so are asked not to film the public gallery. And just to remind everyone that the chairman has the discretion to terminate any recording if continuing to do so would prejudice the proceedings. Item 1 on this evening's agenda, apologies for absence. Chief Executive, do you have any apologies for absence?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I can confirm we've had 6 apologies from Councillor Hazel Allen, Councillor Mike Green, Councillor Nigel Hedges, Councillor Karen Rampton, Councillor Mark Robson and Councillor Roberto Rocca.
Thank you. Agenda item 2, declarations of interest. Do we have any declarations of interest from members for this evening's meeting?
None declared so far, Chairman.
Thank you. Agenda item 3, confirmation of the minutes. To confirm and sign as a correct record the minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of July 2019. Do you have a proposer? Councillor Butler.
Yes, I'd just like to correct an item on the minutes for the meeting. It's actually on page 18, the voting for the motion 15A, climate emergency. It should actually read that 72 councillors voted for it. There were no abstentions and 1 against, which was myself.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. We'll ensure that that amendment is made to the minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chairman. I was going to propose the adoption of the minutes.
Thank you. Second. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Jones. Item 4. Can we just confirm that we agree with those minutes by show of hands, please? Thank you. Thank you. Item 4, Chairman's announcements. Councillors, it's with regret that I refer to a recent death of a former Borough of Poole councillor, Joanne Tomlin, who was a Broadstone councillor from May 2015 to September 2016. Joanne was a member of the Communities and Economy, Overview and Scrutiny Committees. She was also a member of the Broadstone, Murley and Bearwood Area Committee. And I understand that Councillors Julie Bagwell and Julie Butt wish to say a few words.
Tonight we remember a former councillor, Joanne Tomlin. Jo was a wonderful wife, mother, friend and businesswoman who her family are so proud of. Jo was so proud to have been elected as a councillor for Broadstone, and for that I am thankful because she became my sister. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Members, it's always extremely sad to hear of the death of a past councillor, and regardless of political persuasion. But generally it's after perhaps a long life and even long councillor service. But for past councillor Joanne Tomlin, it was neither of these. Joanne served for 18 months from 2015 as a ward councillor for Broadstone, the chairman's already advised us, living just across the border in Waterloo Road, Creekmore. Tragically, she died at the age of 48 years in July this year, a rare and aggressive cancer taking her from us after diagnosis shortly 2 months later. Joanne was a dedicated councillor, and like many new councillors here today, she threw herself enthusiastically into the role and learnt the ropes quickly to better serve her residents. I'm sure there's a lot of people feeling like that. Joanne was an incredible achiever. She built her Creekmore-based lift business up from scratch in the UK and the USA, and over the last 25 years it's now established as a leading provider in the area. She was also a major sponsor of many businesses and charities in Poole and Bournemouth, and achieved the Venus Businesswoman of the Year award for her contributions and innovations to industry. However, what we've heard from Julie, more importantly, Joanne was an amazing family girl, mum of 3 children, wife to her husband Andrew, and colleague to many in this chamber. For me and Julie, and many others, she was our dearest friend and confidant, someone we could always rely on to tell it like it is and not drink all the Prosecco. Friends, please remember Joanne and her like in your hearts and minds this evening. Her life, although far too short, was a life well lived. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for those kind words. Would members be upstanding with me in a tribute to the former councillor? Thank you. Thank you. Members, I understand that Councillor Lisa Lewis wishes to make a statement to the full Council. Councillor Lewis, please.
Thank you for the opportunity, Chair. I feel that I would like to give you all an explanation and also an apology for my carelessness on social media. I have been suspended by the Labour Party for possible breach of rules, pending investigation, in line with standard procedure. I retweeted the Dorset Eye tweet because I'm concerned about the censorship of independent press and media and the motives behind the recent attacks on the Canary. I don't like the fact that someone will use their celebrity status to spread their own message instead of the truth. However, I should have taken more time to read the link to the whole tweet carefully, because upon doing so later, I realised that it used an invidious tone and language which I would never use personally, and it had unpleasant connotations which goes against my innate belief of treating people with respect and dignity. When retweeting, I did not interpret the article as having anti-Semitic connotations. If I thought there was a chance it might be seen as such, I would never have retweeted it, as I find such opinions abhorrent. I've been shocked and horrified to think that my action has caused offence and also resulted in extra work for our council's elected representatives. I have learnt a lesson and will be extremely careful in future. I'm really grateful to those of you who have already shown understanding and support. Thank you. It means a lot.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Moving on then, members, to agenda item number 5, questions from a member of the public. First question is from Mr. Philip Stanley Watts, who has a question to put with regard to the planning process.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman. Can everybody hear me now? I've been here before. It should be a democratic right of residents to take part in the local planning process. So why is the 10-signature objectors letter not within the new planning process policy?
Councillor Phipps, I understand that you will respond to that question. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. Hopefully you can hear me. Thank you for your question, Mr. Stanley Watts. Just to be clear, members of the public can continue to write letters and make comments on planning applications. That has not changed, and there is an embedded democratic right for residents to take part in the planning process. However, in revising the Council's constitution, specifically Part 3 on responsibilities for functions, and actually not local planning policies as referred to in your question, the Council decided that a number of changes were needed to align the various approaches from the 3 legacy councils of Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole on how planning applications were referred to Planning Committee for determination, rather than being determined by planning officers. One of those changes was to no longer have a trigger point, as had been in the case in Bournemouth, of 10 letters of objection, automatically meaning that a planning application would be referred to a Planning Committee for determination. Whilst letters from the public of objection or support are welcome, now, just one objection, citing a material planning consideration, submitted via an elected councillor, can trigger a call to committee. Please do write in, but also do contact your elected councillor, who is there to help you with your concerns. When officers or the Planning Committee make a decision on a planning application, it is the planning merits of the scheme that are considered. It is not the volume of objections, but the material planning considerations that are important. I also want to point out that other changes have been made to the Constitution that broaden the types of applications that can be referred to committee by officers or councillors. For example, householder applications are now included, and often these may only affect 1 or 2 people, and it may not be possible to obtain 10 letters to submit to Council. Also, there's been an extension to the length of time given to members to request that an application be determined by committee to 30 days. But again, I stress the Council welcomes comments from the public on planning applications, and in that respect, those democratic rights have not changed.
Thank you, Councillor.
Do you want me to ask my next question or go away?
Do you have a supplementary, do you, Mr.
I don't think we're allowed supplementary. I have got one if you want me to.
We'll come back to that, Stanley Watts. Thank you. Members, Sarah Ward has a question to put regarding the single A&E and maternity unit at the Royal Bournemouth Hospital, and I understand that Councillor Dedman will respond to the question. Thank you.
Okay.
Can I be heard? Oh, yeah. I'm just too short. Can I be heard? Yeah. Okay. Under the hospital plans, a single A&E and maternity unit at Royal Bournemouth Hospital will serve 750,000 people from the conurbation catchment area and West Hampshire. In addition, 245 acute beds will be cut. There is not enough funding or staff for new integrated community services supposed to reduce demand for acute care. There are acute vacancies and also an NHS recruitment and retention crisis ongoing. Can the Council confirm that issues regarding the ability of the newly planned services to meet anticipated capacity will be fully risk assessed with clear solutions for managing demand which cannot be safely or adequately met?
Thank you for the question. Oops, thank you. And this question's about planning for local health services. And the statutory responsibility for planning health services doesn't lie with this council. It lies with the National Health Service, but the Dorset Clinical Commissioning Group is best placed to respond to your issues in this question. So I can only recommend that you contact the Dorset Clinical Commissioning Group on their customer care team line, and that you can get that on the internet, or I can give you a number for Poole, which is 541 400. So really, that's all I can tell you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dedman. Members, Mr David Fairhall has submitted a question on the changes to the Dorset NHS services, and he has nominated Emma Lang to ask the question on his behalf. And I understand that Councillor Dedman will also respond to this question as well.
I'll just stand back here just a minute. Is it on? Is it on? Okay. The only assessment of the hospital plans is described as lacking in power and not fit for purpose by the clinician panel selected by DCCG. Focus on additional, not total, journey time, ignored patients facing the longest journeys, and most maternity and child emergencies were excluded as they do not get to hospital by ambulance. Later, review of the tiny sample of 34 from the 3,400 patients facing longer journeys over 4 months showed 8 had died or were misdiagnosed. These are huge changes to Dorset NHS services. How will the Council ensure a proper risk assessment is carried out?
Thank you. I was going to start by saying thank you, Mr Fairhall, but thank you in absentia, Mr Fairhall, for the question, again, on plans for the local NHS services. And this question raises issues which have been subject to judgments in both the High Court and the Appeal Court. The issues have also been referred to the Secretary of State, and this was by the former Dorset County Council, which at that point included Christchurch Borough, and it was supported by the then Borough of Poole Council. And the outcome of that referral is still pending, so it's not appropriate for this council to comment on the issues raised in this question. And the responsibility for carrying out these risk assessments, such as significant changes in the local health services, lies with the NHS. So I'm only saying again, but I will say it again, that the questions related to this can be raised with the Dorset Clinical Commissioning Group, who you can contact through their care team on the internet, or I can read you out the numbers, but I've already done that. Would you like me to give you the number?
That's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dedman. Emma Lang has a further question to put regarding the Council's carbon neutral targets and the hospital plans. Emma.
Thank you, Chairman.
BCP Council's climate emergency statement pledges to make BCP Council and its operations carbon neutral by 2030 and work with the wider community to look at how early the BCP region can be made carbon neutral ahead of the UK target of 2050. The hospital plans, which end A&E emissions at Poole and most elective care at RBH, will see 200,000 patients and their visitors having to cross the conurbation for care. These journeys will increase carbon emissions and impact on respiratory health. Could the Council explain in detail how their carbon neutral target sits alongside the hospital plans?
Councillor Hadley, did you wish to respond or would you like to hear the next question?
With the next question, if that's possible.
Thank you.
Who's the next question?
I understand Sue Aitkenhead has a question to put regarding hospital plans and extra journeys, and Councillor Hadley will respond to both Emma Lang's question and Sue Aitkenhead's question at the same time.
The hospital plans mean extra journeys across the conurbation for over 100,000 patients and their visitors. Both hospitals offer emergency and elective care now. Poole will stop A&E admissions, over 38,000 last year, and RBH will stop elective operations, over 74,000 last year. Although this adds up to 113,000, we actually have new evidence since I submitted the question that over 200,000 patients will have to cross the conurbation to access care with impact on the environment. Bournemouth is already the third most congested location in the UK. Yellow buses say the conurbation will grind to a complete standstill unless urgent action is taken to tackle congestion. How will Council prevent gridlock and offset environmental costs?
Councillor Hadley.
Thank you, Chair. I should like to start for transparency, I work for the Clinical Commissioning Group. I'm responding to this question as Transport Portfolio Holder for BCP. I'd like to thank both Emma and Sue for their questions, if I may answer them together. Both questions relate to the over 100,000, and you've now said 200,000 patients and their visitors crossing the conurbation to access services that are currently split between the two hospitals. However, there have been some specialisations between the two of them for as long as I can remember. In respect of maternity, the balance of existing births in the east of the county is that more are born to Bournemouth and Christchurch parents than from Poole and Purbeck parents, so the net travel overall should reduce. The health reconfiguration in Dorset is driven by an aim from the NHS, as you've heard, to increase the 24-hour, 7-day-a-week quality of care, to manage current and future staffing shortfalls and the burgeoning demands for care, especially for our increasingly ageing population. This involves not only specialising care in the two acute hospitals, but also moving some care out to community-based hub settings. The hospital changes are subject to approval from the local planning authority, from us. And in order to gain approval, it would be up to them to fully mitigate against the transport impacts of their plans will have on other users. We are working through the transport implications of the hospital's plans with them and with other partners like the bus companies. We've also been working with the Clinical Commissioning Group on options for non-emergency transport through a transport reference group. The hospital travel plans do include measures to persuade people, staff, patients and visitors to move to other transport options than the private car. But neither the local authority nor the NHS Trust can force a change. We can only create the conditions to help people to choose more sustainable travel options. As more people awaken to the climate crisis, it is down to us all to modify our journey choices. There is an intent in the NHS plans to treat more of the simpler care locally, i.e. in GP practices or community hubs around the county, or indeed in people's own homes. So Poole Hospital, which is in a significantly more sustainable location, will potentially see a decreasing workload, but patients, especially in the more rural areas, for simpler care needs, will have far less distance to travel. I haven't seen the modelling for this, but for the urban area, unfortunately, the community hubs have been chosen by the CCG to be on the acute hospital sites, rather than, for example, the community hospitals, Alderney, Kings Park or other sites. Because of the choice of major urgent care at Royal Bournemouth and planned care at Poole, many departments are switching, so certainly for a period, many staff will on balance have more extended commuting distances. This will of course settle over time. Both hospitals, as public authorities, have carbon reduction targets to meet and programmes of work to undertake, including for travel. To return to the questions, from Sue, how will the Council prevent gridlock and offset environmental costs? And from Emma, could the Council explain in detail how the carbon neutral target sits alongside the hospital plans? The Unity Alliance have challenged the car-centric designs for the Wessex Fields and the likely induced traffic at the Royal Bournemouth Hospital site. The specialisation and centralisation of services does transfer costs for journeys from the hospitals to individuals and to the local authority for providing infrastructure to attempt to prevent gridlock and reduce carbon emissions. We will work with the NHS organisations and with the public across the conurbation to try to mitigate these changes. It can happen. In central London, over 50% of peak rush hour journeys are now undertaken by push bike. In European cities, the vast majority of people use public transport or active travel options. We are bidding to government for Transforming Cities funding to help on this journey, and we will need to get bolder. BCP Council need to make significant investment in integrated public transport and quality space for walking and cycling, but we need businesses and the public to also change their attitude to the car, which can be a great enabler, but also brings congestion, lack of exercise, poor air quality, social isolation, all determinants of bad health. The Council's Climate and Ecological Emergency Declaration commits us to work with partners, businesses and the wider community to investigate, make recommendations and to set a target for how early the Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole region can be made carbon neutral ahead of the UK targets of 2050. We will need very active support from public health colleagues, from the hospital trusts and from many other organisations to achieve this, but most of all help from concerned people like you and from the public at large. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hadley. Members, the next question is from Ms Lisa Weir, who has a question to put regarding planning for local health services, and I understand that Councillor Dedman will respond.
Dorset Clinical Commissioning Group admit significant clinical risk is attached to the plans to end A&E, maternity and paediatrics at Poole. The appeal court judges accepted that longer travel time would increase risk to 396 ambulance patients a year, but didn't know that this number excluded most maternity and child emergencies who do not arrive by ambulance. Under the plans, all Dorset mums delivering under 32 weeks would need to get to RBH. The Clinical Commissioning Group's Equality Impact Analysis says longer travel time in labour, birth and child emergency is a significant risk. How will Council ensure they meet the Poole Plan commitment to improve health?
Thank you. And the question is another one on planning for the local health services. And again, I have to say that the issues you raise have been subject to the judgments made in the High Court, the Appeal Court. They've also been referred to the Secretary of State by former Dorset County Council, including Christchurch Borough, and supported by the former Borough of Poole Council. And the outcome of this referral is pending, so it's inappropriate for the Council to comment on the issues. And the planning of the local health services is the responsibility of the NHS. So if you wish to raise your concerns, that is the appropriate place to raise them. The Dorset Clinical Commissioning Group, either on the internet or the number, which is 541 400. But thank you very much for the question, which is a very good one.
Thank you, Councillor Dedman. Members, just to confirm that I'll extend the 15-minute period that should be allowed for questions and statements in order to allow members of the public who have taken the time and trouble to be with us here this evening to ask their questions or put their statements. The next question is from Mr. Roger West, who has a question to put regarding war memorials. Mr. West.
Mr. Chairman, members, thank you for letting me put my question. Bournemouth Borough House does not have a war memorial with names on it, unlike any other town I have visited. We have 2 books of remembrance locked away behind closed doors. This is wrong. These books should be digitalised so that the public can see their names and possibly add their information. I should particularly like to draw your attention to Pilot Height, whose death residents still remember. I envisage a charity being set up at little or no cost to the council. I would happily donate £100. One possible patron could be Sir Pius Elwood MP. The aim would be to have, in time, to have names on public display. Will the council please support this proposal?
Thank you, Mr. West. Can I call on the leader to respond, please?
Mr. West, thank you so much for your suggestion, which I am personally very interested in. The Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole area had significant activity in the Second World War, and as well as losing large numbers in military conflict, there will have been many affected at home and at work through bombings, accidents and other related incidents. We know that some of these victims have been recognised within their own communities, but it does seem fitting that we now look at a wider memorial for them. I have asked our Armed Forces champion, Councillor David Kelsey, to work with officers to scope out a potential memorial and how that might be funded. And I will be very happy to work with our MPs, including Tobias Elwood, for their thoughts, and thank you kindly for your offer to make a personal contribution.
Thank you, Leader. Members, our last question this evening is from Mr. Philip Stanley Watts.
Thank you, Chairman. This question is on sustainable coastal and river transport. What with the Sandbanks ferry out of service and other infrastructure problems, can the BCP Council, as an enabling authority, consider a water bus service?
Councillor Hadley.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Philip, for your question. I will answer it in regard to the specifics of the Sandbanks crossing and also the wider prospects for water buses. The Sandbanks ferry is a privately run operation under an Act of Parliament of 1927 and responsible to the Poole Harbour Commissioners for the service to the public. The impact on residents on both sides of the harbour and on tourists this year has been really regrettable, and concerns have been raised about the maintenance and the likelihood of further problems. In terms of alternatives, meanwhile, the local bus operator is maintaining a service between Bournemouth and Swanage that still links Sandbanks Pavilion and the Shell Bay ferry terminal. At present, a temporary timetable is in place until November. I am told that the Pill Quay to Swanage ferries have been very popular this summer, and that a private water taxi has also been running for businesses at South Haven. The Bournemouth and Sandbanks Ferry Company are confident the service will be resumed by the end of October, but if the ferry remains out of action beyond this date, the temporary bus timetable can be extended nearer the time, running services up to half-hourly between Bournemouth Station and Swanage. The Council have been working actively with partners including Dorset Council and the Poole Harbour Commissioners to respond to a community effort to get the water bus service running and to have this as a contingency against future failure. This is ongoing but subject to significant regulation. If a suitable temporary passenger ferry was provided between Sandbanks and Shell Bay, then the bus company would most likely operate separate buses to the terminals only and not persist with a lengthy diversion. Clearly this would have to be properly coordinated. The Bournemouth to Swanage Ferry Company have indicated that a replacement ferry is likely to be planned for 2030, subject to sufficient reserves being available. On your wider question, I have been involved previously in attempts to consider water buses for wider use across the area, and it's certainly a resource that we do not make full use of. To run a year-round service along our coastline without a sheltered place to dock in Bournemouth or Boscombe would be challenging, and I believe that Mr Stanley Watts was previously involved in discussions on this. But ferries do frequently run during the summer between Swanage Pier and Bull Quay, and it would be great to get them running to Bournemouth and Boscombe Piers again. Christchurch Harbour has a regular summertime ferry from Tuckton to Murrayford Beach and across the mouth of the run in more sheltered waters. I can remember when the run crossing was by rowing boat, such as still operates from Weymouth. We will certainly be keen to look again at enabling water taxis as part of our transport infrastructure, working with partners, but this would need to be under the jurisdiction of the relevant authorities, Poole Harbour Commissioners, the Coast Guard and the Marine Maritime Organisation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hadley. Thank you. Members, there are no further questions. However, we do have two statements this evening. The first one from Miss Susan Chapman, who wishes to make a statement on the climate change and a governmental petition. Ms Chapman.
Is it on? Okay. Thank you. Good evening. Former Chief Scientist Professor Sir David King is the latest academic to warn of depression over the unexpectedly faster pace of climate change. He calls for collective action. Our local MP at Surgery on Friday depressingly failed to recognise the need for immediate decarbonisation at speed and scale, nor seemed to respond to Youth Strike for Climate when humanity's carbon budget is all but spent and our war on failing Mother Nature is accelerating. There is an online governmental petition to revoke the criminally unscientific 2015 Infrastructure Act, which requires our government to maximise fossil fuel extraction. Please sign and circulate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Chapman. The second statement this evening, members, Morag Morrison has a statement on the provision of on-street disabled parking bays that will be read out by the Chief Executive. Chief Executive.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a statement from Morag Morrison. I'm a resident of Boscombe and Folkestone Ward and Chair of Boscombe Forum. I hold a blue badge and am concerned that there are insufficient on-street disabled parking bays in the area. There are 3 disabled parking bays adjacent to the shared space, which are usually occupied by taxis or cars without blue badges. The recent expansion of blue badges for hidden disabilities will put more pressure on existing spaces. As the Chair of the Boscombe Forum, I would wish to contribute to any future assessment of amenities in the area, and I'm happy for the Forum to help in a public consultation.
Thank you, Chief Executive. And finally, under this agenda item, petitions from members of the public, and I understand the Chief Executive will present the petition this evening to us.
Thank you, Chairman. And just to forewarn councillors, this is over one side of A4, but is apparently within the limit. The number of short-term house rentals to large groups has grown substantially in the last few years in the Poole area. These residential properties are now being used for commercial leisure accommodation as opposed to their intended and designed purpose to house local families and to contribute to a safe, stable and integrated community. A recent web search for house to rent, sleeping 10 or more, showed 63 properties available in Poole. The same search for Bournemouth showed 286 and Christchurch 152. This is only a small selection. Many of these properties are offering accommodation for 20 or more people with 2-day minimal rentals. This can mean there's the possibility of up to 3,000 different people living in a house in a year with all the risks that entails. Local residents report antisocial behaviour and noise at all times of day or night, verbal threats, broken glass and litter in neighbours' gardens and on the roads surrounding the properties, commercial-sized waste bins located at residential properties, used as a central collection point for party house rental companies, very disruptive and noisy, especially on a Sunday morning. A group of 20 people will generally add 6 to 10 vehicles to the road for parking, with many additional vehicle movements, slamming car doors, loud voices on arrival, and general disturbance that brings many associated issues and risks. Activities in the gardens increase with guests barbecuing, engaging in games and playing loud music, often late into the night. To date, the Environment, Health and Planning departments have been ineffective at addressing this issue. Noise abatement orders have been obtained by Poole Council against properties, owners and agents, but no further enforcement action taken or fines issued. Residents blighted by these rentals have been told there's nothing more the council can do, but this is not correct. The planning environment has changed since Poole Council last looked at the issue in 2015. Other councils see this as a material change away from the C3 dwelling house use and have taken enforcement action on planning grounds. Importantly, these enforcement actions have been upheld by planning inspectors, most recently in January of this year. We ask that BCP Council now does the same. We have provided details of 4 councils in England that have successfully taken action against short-term rental properties within the last 2 years, and importantly, the reasons why planning inspectors have upheld their decisions. We believe that any property in BCP area offered for short-term let for more than 6 people does not comply with the C3 use class and therefore should need to seek planning permission for change of use before being allowed to operate. If such properties are required to go through the planning process, their use can be tested against local policies in relation to impact on neighbours, living conditions, parking arrangements, and whether they add to or remove from the local housing stock. At the moment, a party house can be opened beside any of us, and we're told that nothing can be done. This has to stop, please. We ask the BCP councillors to give the enforcement teams the direction and resources necessary to take action to solve this problem once and for all across our area. And there follows a petition with 215 signatures. Jim.
Thank you, Chief Executive. Members, I would propose from the Chair that this petition is referred to the relevant director for discussion with the appropriate portfolio holder. And I believe I have a seconder in the Vice Chairman.
I'm happy to second that.
Are members happy that we move forward on that? Could I have a show of hands, please? Thank you. Agenda item 6, to receive the minutes of the meetings as set out in the agenda item A to M. Are members happy that we take those en bloc? Agreed. Thank you. Agenda item 6N, to receive the record of decisions of the following Cabinet meeting and to consider any recommendations. I believe there are 3 recommendations. Item 1, Boscombe and Folkestone Neighbourhood Plan Decision Statement. Councillor Phipps, I understand that you will move this recommendation.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I would just like to say that this has been a long process for the community and a lot of work for them. And I do think tonight it should be a matter of course that this now goes out to referendum. The plan's been to the examiner, his recommendations have been accepted, and the proposed date for the referendum is the 31st of October. The community support that, as it is the earliest date possible after tonight's decision, should that be in the affirmative from you. So I'd like to propose this as set out, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Phipps. Can I call on Councillor Allison to second the move, please?
Yep, I'm happy to second that one.
Thank you. Any debate? Councillor Mrs. Butt.
Thank you. I know that referendums are rather in our quarter at the moment with what's going on nationally, but the definition of referendum, does that mean consultation? Or referendum consultation? I've never heard the word referendum used with any community issues before, so I just wondered if we could have a definition of that and whether it does mean the consultation or what it actually means. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Butt. Councillor Phipps?
Yeah, no, this has been a very long process for the community. It's producing a neighbourhood plan, and it's already been through a lot of consultation. It's gone through a whole process, and it is now at the stage where it has gone to an examiner. The examiner has given recommendations. They have been accepted. We have a final document, and in order for that to be adopted and then hold weight within the planning system, it has to go out to a referendum of the community within the boundaries of the neighbourhood plan, of that plan. And that is what is going to happen. And it just requires a simple majority of those that are voting in order for this to be accepted. So it is a referendum and not a consultation. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Phipps. Any further questions or debate? Councillor Viz.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I would like to record my thanks and appreciation to the members of the communities in the Boscombe East and Folkestone and Boscombe West areas for their determination to get this to the position we are today. There's been a massive collaboration with a lot of the community. They've all worked together very well. They have also had help from council officers who have kept them going and helped them through the process. So I think they all deserve our appreciation and thanks. I think it'll be probably the second one in the BCP area, and I'm very proud that my ward is part of that.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. Any further questions or debate? No, in which case then I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour, please show. Those against? Any abstentions? Thank you very much. The next item of referral is the Local Development Scheme, the BCP Local Plan. Councillor Phipps, I understand that you will move this recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, again. Right, I'm hoping this is going to be reasonably simple as well, because this is now our local development scheme, which provides a timetable of what local plan documents are to be prepared by the council and when. And it will highlight public consultations where the community and other parties can be involved in the plan-making process. You will know that the government, when it did its change order, stipulated that the new BCP Council must produce a local plan by 2024. This timetable sets out that we are proposing to do it by 2022. It is a statutory requirement that we have a local development scheme. Therefore, I would like to make the proposal to accept the recommendations as set out, that we stop work on all the previous 3 legacy plans and work is refocused on the new BCP local plan, and approve the local development scheme to come into effect on the 23rd of September to confirm the timetable to produce the plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Phipps. Councillor Howell?
I'm prepared to second that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Howell. Do you have any questions or debate? Councillor Haynes.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's just a point of clarification. The portfolio holder said 3 legacy plans. I understand that the pool local plan has actually only recently been adopted, so could you please clarify on that point?
Yes, that is correct. So that was adopted in 2018. The other 2 plans, there was work still ongoing on all of them, and there also would be supplementary documents. But basically, everything now is refocused on the new plan. But you're absolutely right, the pool plan was adopted, yes.
Any further questions or debate? In which case I'll put it to the vote. All those in favour, please show. Those against? Any abstentions? Thank you, members. And the final recommendation, the implementation of pay and reward strategy. Councillor Slade, I understand you will move this recommendation. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Chair. Bringing together the staff across 4 previous councils who are working alongside each other, but often on different salaries and conditions, must be a priority for the council, and requires a huge amount of work to get this right and ensure that we're not only being fair, but that we're not at risk of equal pay claims. I therefore move the recommendations as detailed in the report, which will see us start the process of creating the new pay strategy and ensure that we have this equity across the staff body. I would draw attention to the fact that this will be done in full consultation with unions and staff representatives, and that the final proposals will be brought back to Cabinet via the overview and scrutiny process for a final decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Call on Councillor Brown. Councillor Brown.
I'm pleased to second that.
Members, it's been proposed and seconded. Any questions? Any debate? In which case I'll move to the vote. All those in favour, please show. Any abstentions? Councillor Dunlop, was that an abstention? No. And any against? Thank you, members. Moving on then to item 7, review of the political balance of the council and changes in committee membership. I call upon the leader, please.
Apologies, Chairman. Do we not need to adopt the minutes of Cabinet?
I think we received those minutes. Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies. There is a matter which I don't believe is quite correct on those minutes. Can I speak to that now?
Please do.
Thank you. Members, apologies because this is slightly complicated for those of you who weren't at Cabinet last Wednesday. This is something on which I've written to the Leader of the Council, but to date not received a reply. I know it's been a very busy week with conference in town, but it seems that this is the appropriate time to mention it. The paragraph I'm referring to is the last one on, page 16 for everybody, just immediately above resolved for, that Cabinet. And this is to do with how the confidential papers were dealt with at that Cabinet. When item 17 first arrived, the press and public were immediately excluded without Cabinet moving the recommendations and without presenting, evaluating or even noting the options which were set out in the public pages. There was no opportunity for non-executive members to express their concern at the meeting about things which have been well rehearsed through overview and scrutiny, because this was all done below the line, so with press and public excluded. I'm very concerned, and I've expressed this to Leader, about the intention to be open and transparent, because I don't think this passed the test. And I'm very concerned that the minute says, following discussion on the recommendations contained with the confidential part of the report, the meeting proceeded back into open session for the discussion regarding the buyback of properties. Summing up from the portfolio holder for housing and the vote on the recommendations below. That bit about the discussion regarding the buyback of properties was not done in public session.
Councillor Green.
And I don't think that's correct.
Thank you for bringing this to our attention. What I propose is that we receive the minutes this evening, and the point that you raise will now be referred back to the Cabinet.
Thank you very much, and I think some correspondence to all councillors to understand exactly how meetings should be conducted with confidential information, including what's appropriate to reveal above the line, and the representative views of non-executive members being made clear.
Thank you, Councillor Green, and I'm sure that point will be taken on board.
Very happy to do that, Chair.
Thank you.
And apologies not being able to get back to you.
Right. Agenda item 7. Leader.
Thank you, Chair. So the Council is required to notify any changes in the political groupings and balance of the Council, and it is noted that following a change to the membership of the Christchurch Independent Group, there is a revised political balance as set out in the report. With particular reference to recommendation A, I just want to draw attention to a change on the last line with the asterisk on the bottom of the report, which states that as a change of the consequence, Councillor Brooks will remain on the Overview and Scrutiny Board as a non-aligned councillor. It had been notified to Democratic Services, but not in time for the papers to be released, that an alternative member of the non-aligned group, Councillor Stephen Bartlett, will actually be replacing Councillor Brooks on that, which has no impact on the political balance. It's further noted that there are a couple of other changes of the Dorset Police and Crime Panel and on the Planning Committee, and I'd like to move this paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Mrs Phipps.
I'm happy to second that. Thank you.
Members, it's been proposed and set out at agenda items 7, A, B and C. Does any member wish to ask any questions on that? Any debate? In which case, can I move to the vote, please? All those in favour, please show. Thank you. Any against? Abstentions? Thank you, members. Agenda item 8, notice of motions in accordance with Procedure Rule 13. Could I call on Councillor Mrs Nicola Green, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, members, for the opportunity to bring this motion before you, and thank you to Councillor Haynes for helping me with my papers, which I seem to get in a terrible tangle. Members, as we set about our business as a new council, we have an incredible opportunity to construct things from the ground up. We can say, this is who we are, and this is what we stand for. The Council's Equality and Diversity Policy, which will be adopted later this year, is one of those areas, and looking ahead to the development of this strategy, I invite members to consider this motion. So, members, is it really necessary? Do we, in 2019, really need to challenge ourselves to condemn such old-fashioned concepts as racism, homophobia and misogyny? Do we need to be explicit in our condemnation of prejudice and discrimination? In short, does it take a council motion to commit ourselves to behave like decent people? The sad fact is that we do indeed need such a motion. For all the many benefits of modern life, in a world where the law protects us from unfair discrimination, allows us to live and work protected in law from discrimination, and where we are free to marry whomever we love, there is still a pernicious current of suspicion and prejudice against the other. The reason that I've included here for clarity the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition is that it has come to be regarded as the common standard for the defence against anti-Semitism, a rigorous, fair, comprehensive wording adopted by all major political parties. It was also adopted in this chamber by Bournemouth Borough Council, and I hope very much that BCP will take this opportunity to do the same. There is a delicate irony that at our last council meeting, members enthusiastically embraced a plan to welcome children who had been separated from their families. based upon the initiative of a man who was himself rescued by the Kindertransport, fleeing institutionalised anti-Semitism. And here I am at the next meeting, bringing a motion to plead that this council adopt clear and unambiguous views to distance itself from any of the same kind of prejudice. It is 80 years ago this month that tanks rolled into Poland, signalling the beginning of the industrialised slaughter of a people, predicated upon their perceived wealth, influence and otherness. Jews were not alone. As Martin Niemöller famously said, they also came for the socialists and the trade unionists. But add to this homosexuals, disabled people, political dissidents and other minorities. It is timely for us to make this declaration now, dissociating ourselves from the hatred and ignorance which enabled a people to shut their eyes to the unprecedented evil which was taking place around them. That willful denial carries its own verdict of culpability. We now live in a connected world, one in which we do not need to wait for the daily newspaper nor even the Today programme to hear our news. We're linked with those with whom we share interests, and we can pick and choose what we hear. The challenge for us, and the responsibility we bear to future generations who are growing up with this as their norm, is to ensure that we are selective and intelligent in whom we listen to. If you simply subscribe to those sources you like, you will only ever hear what you want to hear. The temptations of social media and, the pitfalls of Twitter can appeal to our baser natures. Say what you want without consequence at a few strokes of a keyboard. Make the most objectionable statement and you won't have to hear someone's pain nor consider the impact on them. That's not actually the case, is it? And to those of you who add, retweets are not always an endorsement, I call you out here and now. Those words are the modern equivalent of holding your fingers behind your back when you tell a lie. They are childish, they are meaningless, and no one believes you. An objectionable opinion is an objectionable opinion.
You've had your 3 minutes. Thank you.
I believe I have 5, Chairman. I always announce.
There appears to be a little confusion.
Shall I pause while you check, or shall
Yes, please.
I don't have so very much longer.
Carry on.
Thank you.
Please carry on.
Thank you, Chairman. There is a direct line from the Wannsee conference where senior Nazi figures met, through the conflict in the Balkans to the shameful treatment of Luciana Berger. Both involve the societal normalisation of prejudice and the inability of individuals to stop and hold themselves to account. History is littered. Indeed, it is a recurring theme with examples, but it will not change unless we make a concerted effort and inform the public of our commitment. In bringing this motion to Council this evening, it has been my hope that it would be supported by members across the political spectrum. As the debate has grown, many have come forward to discuss the challenges which have faced them in public office. The leader has done so, and I hope with her leadership of equality and diversity very much that she will endorse this motion and attend the Holocaust Remembrance event next January, standing shoulder to shoulder with members of the Jewish community, knowing that we have shown our commitment. That she will also remember Srebrenica, marking a more recent manifestation of intolerance and genocide. In conclusion, members, and on a slightly more optimistic note, we live in a broadly just and respectful society where most people are allowed to flourish and we embrace equality and diversity. But our freedom to do so is fragile. Only by holding ourselves to the highest standards of behaviour will we deserve this freedom. It is fitting that following on from declaring a climate emergency and setting out our stall as a compassionate council by embracing our commitment to unaccompanied children, we declare ourselves as a council where everyone is to be respected, safe and free from prejudice. I so move, Chairman, and I seek a seconder. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Members, we have checked, and the Constitution does state 3 minutes. So, for future reference, please, members. And can I call on Councillor May Hayes to second the motion? And please bear in mind the 3 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm very pleased to be seconding this motion, but I reserve the right to speak at a later stage. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. Councillor Howell.
I'd like to propose an amendment to remove the last sentence regarding adoption of the IHRA definition.
Do you have a second there, Councillor Howe?
I second that.
Thank you, Councillor Rice.
Can I just request that we have some quiet while I speak, because there was a comment before I even spoke there from the other side. So. The problem for some members, including myself, is that the IHRA definition attaches some IHRA attaches some illustrations to its definition of anti-Semitism that restricts freedom of speech and fair comment, and work to prevent legitimate criticism of Israel, its government, and Jews that support it, including accusing Jewish citizens of being more loyal to Israel or the alleged priorities of Jews worldwide than to the interests of their own nations, and denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination, e.g. by claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavour. If anti-Semitism were to be determined in accordance with these illustrations, people could be deterred from or criminalised for pointing out where Jews in the UK are acting in ways designed to prevent criticism of the Israeli government's oppression of Palestinians in the West Bank, imprisonment of Palestinians in Gaza, and discrimination against Palestinians within Israel. Additionally, it seems to me inappropriate and unhelpful to suggest that one form of racism is more serious than any other. My personal experiences of visiting the West Bank and having a book published on the desperate situation of ordinary Palestinians greatly contributed to my decision to get involved in local politics. I would be letting down the many Palestinians who assisted me in the production of the book if I was to remain silent now. The Council's Equality Officer has advised me that BCP Council's draft Equality and Diversity Policy and the associated action plan, which will come to Cabinet in October, clearly sets out the Council's position on anti-discriminatory practice and reinforces the view that all people have the right to live free from prejudice and discrimination, regardless of their race, religion or belief, nationality or ethnic origin. He is of the opinion that the IHRA definition is not legally binding and fits with the principles of the promotion of equality. In my opinion, though, it is clear that when combined with the illustrations, the definition could be used for political ends. Given the officer's opinion, this is not a motion on which the Cabinet needs to or should take a position. Each member's view as to whether incorporation of the IHRA definition is appropriate will be influenced by international politics, personal opinion and conscience. Each member should be free to express his or her opinion without undue influence from within or without this chamber. Given the sensitivity of this matter and the tendency for statements concerning anti-Semitism to be misrepresented, I request that this statement, which I am reading, is included in its entirety in the minutes of this meeting and made available to the media promptly on request. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Howell. Councillor Filer. Beg pardon.
Thank you, Chairman.
Just one moment, Councillor Filer. Apologies. Councillor Rice, did you wish to speak? Councillor Rice.
As a large leading organisation, we care deeply about all of our residents, staff and councillors, and we value and respect diversity. We also value all our diverse population equally. It is for this reason that I do not feel that we need to be picking out individual religions or races above others. And in fact, I feel that the motion is more powerful and fair without the last sentence. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rice. Councillor Filer.
Thank you, Chairman. I stand absolutely shocked at that amendment. I'm Jewish. There's a number of Jewish people in this council chamber. There's a number of people of all different ethnic. It's the most diverse council I've ever sat in. There are people of different religions. But it just happens that anti-Semitism is the overriding... 80 years ago, Hitler was slaughtering people in Germany, and we all know about that. Holocaust Memorial Day reminds us. It's an outrage I was born in England, my grandparents were born in England, we're loyal British subjects. To equate me with anything that's going on worldwide is absolute... It's an insult, it's a shock, it's a disgrace that we stand here at this council meeting in this chamber and hear such anti-Semitic rubbish. It's complete rubbish. I'm shaking with indignation. I can't believe that people would dare spout such stuff at this time when there's been so much going on in all the world. There's many things in politics I don't agree with. I don't always agree with the government of this country. I'm sure people in every country don't all agree with their governments, otherwise we would never have a change of government, would we? I'm sure in Israel there are things that the people in Israel don't agree with. But I live in this country. I vote in this country, and anti-Semitism is an insidious worm. And that sort of speech is actually perpetuating the anti-Semitism. 80 years on and we're forgetting. I would like the councillor who proposed this to come along to Holocaust Memorial Day and hear one of the living people who lived through the Holocaust. The people like Walter Cameling and others who speak every year, they're living testimonials. They won't be here much longer. They're all in their 90s. And I think it's an absolute outrage, and I'd like my outrage to be recorded.
Thank you, Councillor Fowler. Councillor,
let's make a personal statement, Chair. I'd like it. My statements were accused of being anti-Semitic. I'd just like recorded in the minutes that Councillor Fowler accused my statement of being anti-Semitic, and I will consider taking that to the Standards Committee at a later date. Thank you.
Councillor Williams.
I'm in the same shock as Councillor Fowler. I'm one of 5 Jewish councillors that I know of. There may be more here tonight. I've only lived in Bournemouth 40 years, so I'm a relative newcomer by Bournemouth standards. But the Jews of Bournemouth have been here more than 130 years, and most of us feel and are very, very British. My great-grandparents were immigrants. I wonder how many people here can go past that far back. I'm a former lay leader of the Jewish community, and if this had happened during my watch, I would have been up in arms as much as I am today. I thought we'd gone past all of this at the end of World War II, but it seems it's all coming back again. And I suggest very strongly that amendment is withdrawn, as it's so anti-Semitic. Thank you.
Can I make a personal statement again? If members are going to continue to say that my statement... Thank you, Chair.
Could you just give us two minutes?
For clarity, my understanding, and those members may wish to speak to confirm or otherwise this, is that the allegation is that the statement made that you are not... There's no allegation that you are anti-Semitic, or that your statement is, but that it encourages potentially anti-Semitism. That's my understanding. But Councillor Howell, you have made your position clear as well in response to that.
I mean, I just don't believe that was what the words actually said there, so can I ask them to be more specific and careful in their wording if they're going to make future comments?
Councillor Dunlop, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll tell you why it's anti-Semitic. The myth that claims the IHRA working definition of anti-Semitism as a name is actually called the Livingston formulation, and it doesn't take much of a leap to work out why, because it's easy to work out what's really going on. Someone spreads this can't criticise Israel myth, and the people who spread this myth usually have a history of criticism of Israel and Jews. Have you actually read the definition? You're claiming you've read it, but it's very clear. applying double standards by requiring of it, that's Israel, a behaviour not expected or demanded of any other democratic nation. The IHRA definition of anti-Semitism actually says, if you read the text around it, criticism of Israel similar to that levelled against any other country cannot be regarded as anti-Semitism. None of the most frequently heard criticisms of the current Israeli government policy fall foul of the definition of anti-Semitism. This means you can carry on criticising Israel's occupation of the West Bank, call for its immediate withdrawal and the creation of a Palestinian state alongside Israel and not be anti-Semitic. Calling Israel's efforts to deter Hamas rockets and terror disproportionate is not anti-Semitic either. So you can continue to make all these criticisms and they're not considered anti-Semitic. This myth is a poisonous accusation because it involves refusing to engage with anti-Semitism, like some of you are doing now. But I know some of you, and I know some of you aren't anti-Semitic, I don't know all of you, and I can't believe that some of you would hide behind this myth that's being peddled. Wouldn't it be marvellous if we all lived in a world where there was no prejudice? We all had no problem with cultures, religions, races. We wouldn't need the Equality Act, and we wouldn't need a chunk of our laws. Wouldn't it be lovely to go through life having never been the victim of prejudice or bigotry or even hatred because of our differences? You know, personally the worst I've experienced is, you're from Birmingham, you must be stupid. Or, you're a bit fat and saggy now you've got old. But look at most people in this chamber. Look at you. You're all from the same cultural group. Have you ever experienced any of this? Of course you haven't. You don't really know what bigotry, prejudice and what it's like, what it's really like, do you? You're sat here hiding behind this fig leaf of a myth. Why are you here? What is your purpose? It's not to sit here with your European cultural privilege and just make a judgment on something you don't want to get into or trying to hide behind stuff because you can't understand it. There's a myth being peddled here. And I ask you to do the decent thing. Step outside of this myth. Stand up and be counted. And don't support this amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Dunlop. Councillor Broadhead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was expecting to say something very different tonight because I was very much looking forward to this motion. The reason I was looking forward to this motion is that I am a father of 3 young children, and many of us here have children of all ages. And let's look at the things that the Council has done so far, and there is quite a bit to be excited about. One of the very first things that this Council did almost unanimously was to approve the Climate Change Declaration. And I view that as exciting for my children because what that says is I care on behalf of them about the environment for them in the future, the physical environment for the future. So therefore this motion was what I considered to be the next step in the preparation of the future and the securing the future for my children. We've already secured the physical environment for the future. Let's secure the moral environment for the future. And actually saying very simply that we not only don't accept any form of racism, but being very specific because of certain issues for the day is just logical, and it sends a message to my children and to everyone and beyond that's expecting of us to set the precedent for how BCP Council is going to be at the future. Of course, this amendment completely undermines that. What this amendment actually says is that the definition of anti-Semitism, which, let's be clear, has been accepted by every major party, including the Labour Party, and also has been accepted by the UK and 30 other nations, this amendment is saying, but we know better. Because we don't agree with them. Somehow we know better than everybody else that actually, and including major nations that have accepted this definition. And even the proposer accepted that it is a non-legally binding working definition as well. But because he conflates that it might be legally binding in other ways because of bits around it, we're messing around with edges. And what message are we sending to the wider public? What message are we sending to our children? Let's all agree that we shouldn't be standing for anything like this. Let's agree the original motion and move together forward positively. Because the message that's going to be sent by agreeing to this amendment is not all forms of racism are equal, and we know better, and it's just not acceptable. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Broadhead. Councillor May-Haynes.
Thank you, Chairman. Just wanted to come back to the proposed amendment that has actually been tabled, and why I don't agree that the basis of excluding that last line is acceptable. Councillor Dunlop has actually given some examples of what can be said and will be acceptable and not considered as anti-Semitic. Now, as Councillor Broadhead has said, the IHRA definition has been accepted and implemented by the UK government, the Scottish government, the London Assembly, and the list goes on. There was consideration about the fact and the point that the amendment raises, which is that the IHRA stifles freedom of speech. Well, it says that there is an existing caveat that criticism of Israel, similar to that levelled against any other country, cannot be regarded as anti-Semitic and was sufficient to ensure freedom of speech. But also that whilst definition is non-legally binding, it nevertheless provides an important tool for criminal justice agencies and other public bodies to actually work on. You say you remove it. You have no definition. So what? You take it on a case-by-case basis? You do have to have, just like we have planning policies, you do have to have a set of guidelines. You do have to have a standard, a common standard, as Councillor Green has actually stated in her opening remarks for proposing the motion. So if we take that away, where does that leave us as a council? And as Councillor Broadhead says, what message are we sending out to our public in the conurbations, our friends, our colleagues, and more importantly to our Jewish community? You're saying, well, why are we singling them out and giving them special treatment? Well, there has been a lot of social media coverage, and it's extremely distressing. I'm not Jewish, but I have Jewish friends, and it is extremely distressing for them to have to see this day in, day out. And I think that we will be doing the right thing by adopting definition, the IHRA definition, and therefore I cannot support that proposed amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. Councillor Coop.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I bring to the attention of this Council something that was in the national press over the weekend? New crackdown on anti-Semitism. And it states, councils and public bodies that refuse to adopt the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition on anti-Semitism will be named and shamed. And I would hate this new council to be named and shamed as several other major city councils have been. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Coop. Councillor Trent.
Thank you, Chair. I find it difficult to actually decide which way to turn on this, because I think the first 6 lines, no problem at all. The 7th line actually becomes a problem if you haven't got an 8th, 9th and 10th line, because it seems to say we're against prejudice and discrimination, but especially that prejudice and discrimination. I'm personally worried about Islamophobia. If you want to see some nasty social media stuff, you want to see some of the stuff that's been put out against Muslims and so on. And in the last year or so, I got rather befriended because I sort of started to explain, well, you're talking nonsense sort of thing. We actually need to condemn all racism, not just one particular form of racism or anti-religion. We actually need to do it. So, if I do support this, it would be on condition that we actually have a look at the wording of this and modify it and improve it so that we actually make it clear that it's not about just one form of discrimination. It's about all forms of discrimination. And I really think that we actually need to think not just what's in the press at the moment, but some of the other issues that are going on worldwide, because we do really need to end discrimination, not just a particular discrimination.
Thank you, Councillor Trent. Councillor Bungay.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't think any member in here would want to be labelled as a racist. And I think perhaps the way forward, because obviously tonight we're getting very contentious, and there are merits on what has been said. However, I think that prior to the new constitution, which will incorporate paragraphs dealing with all of this, this is perhaps premature at this stage and should be postponed until the constitution is published, and those working on the constitution can take this very topic into the constitution so that it's agreed by all members. I think tonight it could get very contentious, very argumentative, and nothing could be resolved. I have every sympathy with what's been said on the anti-Semitism issue, and I think I have every sympathy with what has been said on the issues of any form of segregation or arguments that degenerate any religion, race or anything. This council needs to put that into its constitution so that all members round here can agree unanimously a constitution that is fit for purpose. And I would suggest at this stage, if we adjourn this item until the constitution is formulated and published with all this incorporated, then we can move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bungay. Councillor Ball.
Thank you, Chair. I've listened to the debate so far with great interest. When I was a Bournemouth Borough Councillor, I voted in favour of the motion then to adopt the IHRA statement, and I will do so again tonight. I believe that none of us in this room are racist, and that we should all support the motion. I am myself, as everyone in Bournemouth Council knows, am an atheist, but I support everyone's right to have their own beliefs. And I think I'd like to thank Councillor Dunlop, because each time we have a debate around these matters I get a bit more educated and a bit more understanding about things. And I am surprised that Councillor Dunlop's been able to educate me, but no, I'm joking. Joking aside, I will support the motion and not the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ball. Councillor Beasley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have a lot to say because most of what I would have said has already been stated by members. But we were having, I think, an orderly debate on the motion, which was completely disrupted by this amendment. And in speaking to the amendment, I find it frankly outrageous that we hear this amendment against a definition which has been adopted by governmental and non-governmental organisations worldwide. And at this stage in the debate, to hear that the most critical part of it at the end is to be withdrawn is totally unacceptable. The mover of the original motion was talking about the principles that we stand for. And asked the question, do we still need to condemn anti-Semitism in 2019? Sadly, yes we do. The amendment, in my mind, is anti-Semitic in its effect. I hope that satisfies the mover of the amendment, and he won't be taking me to the Standards Board, because if he is, he'll have a fight on his hands. For me, it's also really more than surprising that the Deputy Leader of our Council, supported by a member of the Cabinet, can bring forward such an appalling amendment on such a sensitive and important issue, particularly in a place such as Bournemouth with such a large Jewish population. I find that unacceptable, Mr. Chairman, and I call on the mover and the seconder to withdraw their amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Beasley. Councillor Stribley, did you indicate? Thank you. Vice Chairman.
This is my third time in a chair as a vice chair. Sorry. Do you require me to stand up? There you go. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak to this. It's been very interesting to hear the debate back and forth. It was Councillor Beasley's remarks which seemed to resonate most with myself, in that Councillor Beasley said that the most critical part of the motion was the last sentence, the IHRA. I am fully supportive of the motion, and I'm fully supportive of the UN definitions, which I believe that the Council is going to adopt anyway. So it struck me as strange that this last sentence, which seems fairly clumsy, seems to define that one form of racism has more precedence than another. And I come back to the fact that Councillor Beasley said the most critical part is the last sentence. So, for this particular motion, listening to what Councillor Trent had to say, I think it's premature based upon the work which is actually going forward for the Council itself. And I would think that being a premature motion and what's going on here tonight, then it's a very, very difficult motion to not abstain on, because I believe that there's work to be done on the motion itself, and I think the motion is premature and is not required at this moment in time.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Councillor Brooks.
Fine. Thank you, Chairman. My granddaughter, age 11, is half Sri Lankan, and I am totally aware of the levels of hatred and discrimination and comments that can be launched at anyone who is different, colour of skin, race or whatever. I am quite happy to support the motion as is written, but would request that when the policy and strategies are published in the Council for us to consider eventually, that all elements of discrimination are specified and made absolutely clear that this Council condemns all aspects. And that came through from Councillor Trent, and I would like to pick up also on Councillor Broadhead's comments that he made with regard to the climate emergency. I agree totally with him and the sentiments expressed, and this sort of motion is something that we ought to push forward as a brand new Council. So I am going to support the motion in its entirety, but as I say, I would like the policy that comes forward to be very, very clear that it makes reference to all levels and types of discrimination, so that no one issue is discriminated against another. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks. Leader.
Thank you, Chair. I wasn't planning to speak on this part. I was planning to speak on the main motion, but as specific reference has been made to the equalities policy, I felt now was the time to speak. As someone who has visited the state of Israel and Palestine in the last few years, and actually spent time this weekend with the MP, Luciana Berger, and key members of the Jewish communities, I have a really good understanding of the issues that do face the Jewish community. I've spent significant amounts of time with Orthodox Jewish families living in Israel and understanding the pain that they've been through. I've also attended the Holocaust Memorial Day for the last 5 or 6 years, not only in Poole but also in Wimborne, and my son took part himself singing a Hebrew song at this year's event and lit one of the candles. As you will see from my lanyard, I am proudly wearing the Remembering Srebrenica badge. I was proud to take part in that event, and I am doing my best to engage with as many of our ethnic groups across BCP as I am able to do. I am completely supportive of the motion, and as a member of the Liberal Democrats, we have adopted the international definition. I do understand the issues around the examples, and I would like to put it on record that I would be very upset if at any time any member of this council chose to take action if somebody criticised the state of Israel in the same way as I would reserve the right to criticise Donald Trump or any other leader. I am not, by definition, accusing the people of America. I am therefore unable to support the amendment. I will be supporting the motion as is.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Dove. Councillor Evans.
Thank you. I'd like to echo Councillor Farquhar's sentiment. I truly believe the most critical part of this motion is the first part, and I would like to remind members that not adopting a definition in no way implies promotion of the opposite sentiment. I therefore support the amendment, as I feel the final sentence is unnecessary, not because I'm anti-Semitic. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rigby.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say I'm kind of surprised that we've been debating this for so long in 2019. My great-grandparents were Jewish from Russia. They came over just at the start of the Second World War to Liverpool. And granted, they were on their way to New York, but they got off a boat at Liverpool. And they were welcomed there with nothing but open arms, and they made it their home. And our family has been there ever since, except myself. With saying this, I kind of understand where the debate has come from, but I've got to say, criticism, as the leader said, of the state of Israel is not criticism of Jewish people, the Jewish religion, anything like that. It is criticism of a state, and what we are condemning here is anti-Semitism and racism. I can't support the amendments, and I will support the original motion in full.
Thank you, Councillor Rigby. Councillor Kelsey.
Thank you, Chairman. As a member who has 45% of his ward being Jewish, I do find this very difficult to accept the amendment. In fact, I find it appalling. Along with my colleague, Councillor Filer, we moved and seconded the original thing in Bournemouth to accept it. And we were congratulated by some people, including a very prominent Labour man, Mr Ben Grower, which really surprised me when he phoned me up that night to say he'd listened to the debate and was really pleased that Bournemouth Council then had taken this move. And I'm sure he would be equally disgruntled if we did not continue that tonight on behalf of BCP. So I urge members not to support the amendment. I myself am one of the minority groups in this town that has suffered years of abuse, and I don't think anyone else should have that. And I will be very, very grumpy if we go back on the excellent equalities and diversity strategy that we had in Bournemouth, and that I've already seen members of BCP who took part in the recent Pride Parade go forward with that, and I would like to see that improved on, and this motion, as it reads, can only help with that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody else wishing to speak? Councillor Lawson.
Thank you, Chairman. I have been a councillor since 2007, and I find it shocking, disappointing and surprising that we have to bring a motion like this to our council. You would have thought all those thoughts of anti-Semitism would have disappeared years ago. Like the last speaker, I'm from Liverpool, where there's mixed races, Chinese, Africans and Jewish people, and I grew up with those people on the council estate in Liverpool. I agree with Councillor Brooke earlier on that we should condemn all types of racism. Like Councillor Slade, I've been to Israel 3 or 4 times, I can't remember, I think it's 4 times. I love Israel, I think it's a fantastic country. It's one of the few democracies in that area. Israeli people are very welcoming, and they don't show any signs of racism at all to anybody, especially a poor boy who grew up on a council estate in Liverpool. I find it unbelievable that we have to bring a motion like this to our council. We've been in existence for 3 months, 4 months, and we have to bring a motion like this forward. Unbelievable. What on earth are we doing? On this day and age, where we tolerate people, we should be accepting people, we have all kinds of people who have come to our country and we've welcomed them with open arms, and yet we have to bring a motion like this to our council. And for Councillor Howell to bring an amendment, I just find unbelievable. What are you thinking to bring an amendment like that? Appalling. I cannot understand why you've brought something like this. We are totally supportive of the motion, and I expect and hope that the people opposite us will support it as well. This is non-political. You are not letting the side down by doing and voting for this, our motion. It's not our motion. I just made a faux pas there. It's not our motion. It's a motion where we condemn racism. It's a motion where we condemn anti-Semitism. We should be an open and welcoming council. Last week at the Cabinet, a member of the Cabinet said this is a different council these days from the previous ones. So far, it's not proved to be that if we have to bring a debate on anti-Semitism. Please support this motion.
Thank you, Councillor Lawson. Councillor Matthews.
Thank you, Chair. I fully support the original motion which has been proposed this evening. I'd really like to echo the points that Councillor Brooke made very eloquently, because ultimately bigotry, we've mentioned the words tolerance in the Chamber this evening, it's great to hear that, but these are not exhaustive definitions. As I see this, I think as we go forward as a council, ultimately our understanding is going to grow, it's going to widen, the list is going to get longer, and actually that's great. If that's what it takes, absolutely fantastic. I'm actually just going to digress very slightly, but to make a connection with the Jewish community and so on. I'm actually from Penzance, and I'm not Jewish, but there was a very strong Jewish community in Penzance, and our high street was called Market Jew Street, and one of our neighbouring towns was called Marazion. So it's very much something that was sort of intrinsic to my childhood. Fully support the motion. Yes, get on with it.
Councillor Stribley.
Thank you, Chairman. I believe this motion says everything that most people in this chamber really agree with. I grew up in the wartime. For a considerable time we had Jewish refugees living in our front room. We had other refugees living upstairs, and I lived in a small semi-detached house, and I think there were 10 of us there at that time, and amazingly everybody managed. I don't have any particular religion, but I do respect those that do. I believe the amendment as put is totally pointless. It doesn't add anything to the motion before us. It detracts from it, and that is a shame, because we have a very large Jewish community in the conurbation. There has been a lot of issues with anti-Semitism right across the country recently, and I think we need to stand up and say that we are not part of that, and we will have nothing to do with that. And I believe every member in this chamber really believes that. We are all elected to represent every single resident within our wards. We're not here to represent just those who voted for us. We are here to do our best for everyone, and I believe a motion like this should be acceptable right across the chamber, regardless of who presented it or put it forward in the first place. And I'm really sorry that I believe it has been picked at politically rather than adopting what I believe every member in this room has in their hearts. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Stribley. Any further speakers? Councillor Dedman.
Thank you, Chairman. I wasn't going to speak. What I can say is that the 2010 Equality Act, I think, is very important. On a personal level, I suffered discrimination in my early years for something which is not even in the Equality Act nowadays and is not a discriminatory factor. I won't go deeper into that. One's birth is one's own business. But I can only agree that disability, gender reassignment, marriage and civil partnership, pregnancy and maternity, race, and again, I'm Peruvian partly, so that's interesting to me, sex and religion or belief. There is no place in this council for any discrimination of that kind. And I totally agree with that. I'm very sorry that the councillors felt they had to bring this motion, and I totally agree with what is said in the body of it. Adopting the internationally adopted IHRA definition makes no difference from my point of view. I've always attended all the Holocaust memorials. Everybody's talking about where they were brought up. I was brought up in North London, but that's a minor detail. People who lived in North London will know that we had lots of Jewish neighbours in the same way as we had lots of Irish neighbours. There is no room anywhere for any discrimination against anything that people do or think, and I think that this council does agree wholeheartedly with that.
Thank you, Councillor Dedman. If there are no further speakers, I will call upon Councillor Howe to sum up, please.
Thank you, Chair. Right, I'll try and address most critical points. Firstly, I would have agreed with Councillor Bungay that the probably best forum for this would be a debate in over scrutiny. It's a pity that he didn't propose an amendment to an amendment there. I think that what is critical for me and why we are ending up in this situation where so many people who are not anti-Semitic are being accused of being anti-Semitic is because of a failure by people in responsibility to make a clear distinction between anti-Semitism and criticism of Israel. In fact, it is in the Israeli government's interest to conflate those two issues, to lessen the criticism of it. With regard to Councillor Lawson's point that he's seen no racism in Israel, I would advise him next time he visits to go over the border, which you just go through a fence one way, a non-returnable gate into the West Bank, and see where you have illegal settlements built in the West Bank, and you have the poor Palestinian towns. Well, you would see in your eyes,
members, please,
the vicious discrimination there. Right. Point 4. I have been to Belsen and to Auschwitz and to the Holocaust Memorial in Jerusalem. Auschwitz in particular was a very moving experience, and I am not trying to undermine the enormous impact of genocidal acts against Jewish people or indeed other races, religions, groups that over time have suffered genocidal acts. Right. With regard to Councillor Dunlop's comments, you are not talking about the definition there. You are talking about the illustrations on the website which accompanied the definition, which was corrected by Councillor Haynes on your side, recognised by her. You looked at us and said, as a body, that we're incapable of understanding discrimination. But discrimination is not always visible. And you're not in the position to be able to say that to anybody here, and I'm sure lots of people on this side of the room and the other side of the room have suffered discrimination in their lives, and probably suffering from it still. In terms of where we are, number 6, yeah.
Councillor Howe.
I've almost finished. In terms of freedom of speech, it's interesting, isn't it, that you say, actually, this is about protecting freedom of speech, but actually when somebody tries to exercise freedom of speech, they tend to be shouted down on this issue. And Councillor Coote said, we're going to be named and shamed for this act. Yeah, but that again, that is attempt to restrict freedom of speech, isn't it? I have not said anything anti-Semitic tonight. I'm just pointing out that actually there needs to be a clear difference accepted between criticism of Israel, which should be allowable, and anti-Semitism, which clearly shouldn't.
Could you wind up?
So finally, I'd just like to say this whole exercise tonight, I feel, has demonstrated why this last sentence shouldn't be here, because we've ended up in this debate, and rather than failing to recognise the wider impact of discrimination and different types of discrimination. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Howe. Councillor Mrs. Green. Just one moment, please. I'll ask the monitoring officers to clarify where we are.
Just for members' awareness, because I've heard murmurings about we have to move to the vote. Councillor Green, as the mover of the original motion, has the final right to reply following the debate on the amendment. So Councillor Mrs. Green will now respond to the debate on the amendment, and then we move to the vote on the amendment, and then move back to the substantive debate.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, that was a very unpleasant surprise, but I'm sure certain people are delighted that they've sprung it. I have to say, Councillor Howell, I don't think you get it. I find your arguments regarding freedom of speech to be specious, spurious and selective. Is the IHRA definition perfect? Perhaps not. It is, however, accepted as the industry standard for any debate. To question this is to show immense disregard for the work that has gone on internationally to establish a clear and reliable framework. What arrogance. Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party get it. They've accepted this definition. Unsurprisingly, to my mind, and I'm not often heard saying lovely things about the Liberal Democrats, but they embraced it. They're committed to fighting bigotry. Let's be absolutely clear. Their statement on this is they're committed to fighting bigotry and prejudice in all its forms. They reconfirmed the party's adoption of the 2016 IHRA definition in full with its worked examples. It's been used by the party to handle complaints and disciplinary processes since 2016. They get it. It's embedded within the Conservative Party Code of Conduct. We get it. And yet others in this chamber know better. With reference to Councillor Evans' comment that the last sentence is unnecessary, I would make the following comment. This council will not solve global warming on its own, and the predecessor councils have much to be proud of in the work they've done. But it is perfectly fitting that it commits to declaring a climate emergency. This council will not solve the refugee crisis which exists around the world, and it already does more than the safe passage motion suggests. But it is right and proper that this council makes a clear statement about its intentions towards separated children. Likewise, it is entirely within the powers of this body to make a clear and unambiguous statement of our views on this subject. It has, of course, to be embedded in a set of council policies, and I absolutely understand Councillor Trent's comment that it needs to be a fully comprehensive set of policies which sit behind that, and I will cheerfully work with him to find an acceptable definition of every type of prejudice. But this motion, as it was tabled, was an opportunity for this council to come together in a spirit of optimism, collective spirit and generosity, setting out clearly how we intend to go our business. I invite all members to do so. I'm very grateful to those who have been supportive of the motion, and if I've not commented upon you, I hope to have the opportunity to sum up on the substantive motion. But just in closing, I would make the following observation, that Councillor Howell, Councillor Rice are, of course, free to support the amendment. There may be others. However, they will be called to account for their actions by our residents, by the community, and I would suggest that you consider very carefully who your fellow travellers are on this journey. Chairman, I will not accede to the amendment. I do not accept it, and I will be asking for a recorded vote on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Green. If members wish to have a recorded vote, the Constitution requires a quarter of members present to stand. Thank you. Members, we are now voting on the amendment, and the monitoring officer will request your vote in alphabetical order. Thank you.
Just say it again. We're voting on the amendment or the vote?
We are voting on the amendment, Councillor Lawson.
So,
are all members clear that we are voting on the amendment? Thank you.
So this is the amendment proposed by Councillor Howell to delete the final sentence of the motion, and so all those in favour of Councillor Howell's amendment to vote for. Councillor Allison. Sorry? Thank you. Anderson. Okay. Sarah Anderson. Andrews. Bagwell. Barron. Bartlett. Beasley. Borthwick. Broadhead. Brooke. Brooks. Brown. Bull. Bungay. Burton. Butler. Butt. Daniel Butt. Judy Butt. Coop. Cox. Davies. Decent. Deadman. Dion. Dove. Dunlop. Earl. Edwards. Evans. Farquhar. Foy. Filer. Flagg. Geary. Nicola Green. Hadley. Haynes. Hall. Hilliard. Howell. Iyengar. Johnson. Toby Johnson. Jones. Kelly. Kelsey. Lawton. Lepredevin. Lewis. Maidment. Matthews. McCormack. Miles. Moore. Northover. O'Neill. Parish. Phillips. Phipps. Rice. Rigby. Slade. Stribley. Trent. White. Williams. And Wilson. That amendment therefore falls, Chairman.
Thank you, members. Can I call upon Councillor Mrs Green then to sum up on the substantive motion? I think the item has been well debated this evening, but is there any members wishing to speak at all? No, thank you. Councillor Mrs Green, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I think I've just demonstrated why I'm totally incapable of going paperless, in spite of my very best efforts to embrace technology. Clearly there has been a long and detailed and interesting and challenging debate, and I am truly grateful to members of the Council who've given their time this evening and allowed us to explore it in some detail and some depth. I would just like to thank those who, through the amendment debate, offered their support to this motion for varying reasons, but all of you demonstrating a real understanding of the issues which our town faces and the confidence and the optimism with which this council looks to go forward. Chairman, I don't think I have much more to add other than to convey to you and the officers my thanks for the way in which you've navigated us through a slightly complex debate. But if I need formally to respond and say that I do indeed support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Members, those wishing to have a recorded vote, we need 25% standing, please. Thank you very much. The monitoring officer will go through the same process.
Thank you, Chairman. This is on the substantive motion. Those in favour of the motion as it stands unamended to vote for. Allison. Anderson. Sarah Anderson. Andrews. Bagwell. Barron. Bartlett. Beasley. Borthwick. Broadhead. Brooks. Brown. Bull. Bungay. Burton. Butler. Daniel Butt. Judy Butt. Coop. Cox. Davies. Decent. Deadman. Dion. Dove. Dunlop. Earl. Edwards. Evans. Farquhar. Farr. Filer. Flagg. Geary. Green. Hadley. Haynes. Hall. Hilliard. Howell. Iyengar. Johnson. Toby Johnson. Jones. Kelly. Kelsey. Lawton. Lepoidovin. Lewis. Maidment. Matthews. McCormack. Miles. Moore. Northover. O'Neill. Parish. Phillips. Phipps. Rice. Rigby. Slade. Stribley. Trent. White. Williams. Wilson. That's carried, Chairman.
Thank you, members. Moving on then to agenda item 9, questions from councillors. Councillor Beverley Dunlop, I understand you have a question to put to Councillor Slade on the Council's policies upholding the 9 characteristics as defined in the 2010 Equality Act. Councillor Beverley Dunlop.
Thank you, Chairman. Given the significance of the motion before Council tonight and its purpose to eliminate any form of prejudice or discrimination from BCP, as Equality and Diversity Champion, could the Leader please advise what steps she is taking to ensure the policies of this Council uphold the 9 protected characteristics as specified in the motion, as defined in the 2010 Equality Act, in order to safeguard the rights of those groups as defined within that Act?
Thank you, Councillor Dunlop. Leader, please.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Dunlop. I feel like we've
sort of done this, but there we go. I can confirm that the pre-teen councils all had equalities and diversity policies, and that we have prioritised a brand new policy for Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council, which we had intended to bring before Cabinet last week, so we could have adopted it today. However, we did decide to postpone this to make the wording much stronger, and so that there was no ambiguity about the importance behind it. And it will be coming before Cabinet in October, and I look forward to presenting that to you. The policy will clearly state that the Council will not tolerate any form of unjust, unfair or unlawful discrimination by or towards any of its staff, contractors or partners, including those who deliver services on our behalf. The Council's commitment to equality and diversity will be embedded in BCP's corporate strategy, which is coming to full Council for approval in November, and which we had a members' seminar on earlier, and which was subject to wide stakeholder engagement over the summer. The suggested groups within the framework are as identified within the Equalities Act 2010. A BCP Council Equality Impact Assessment process is in place, and shortly all BCP Council Equality Impact Assessments will be published on the BCP Council website. The implementation of an Equality and Diversity Action Plan and an internal equality and diversity governance framework and a senior managers group will ensure that there is a clear route for escalation of issues and that activities set out in the plan are fully delivered.
Thank you, Leader. Councillor Dunlop, did you have a supplementary at all?
Thank you, Leader, for your answer. And I don't doubt your commitment to any of this, please don't. And I'm going to respectfully ask if that you might want to have a look at some of the papers that came before Cabinet. I was just looking at some of the sections that relate to the Equality Act and talks about equality and diversity. And there are some glaring errors in there, and they relate to the characteristics. I'm not going to go through this whole list because you've heard me enough. So I'm just going to make my point respectfully, as I say, and just think that perhaps someone needs to, and it's not you, get the nose into some of this, because there is reference to protected characteristics, which are ethnicity, gender, transgender, and social inequalities. And I'm sure you all know by now, none of those are protected characteristics. And I'm happy to talk this through with you, if you don't mind, offline. But I thank you for your commitment.
Thank you, Councillor Dunlop. I'm really glad you brought that to my attention. We have been commenting that some of the references at the bottom of the papers are in some cases inadequate, and in other cases actually officers are not taking the opportunities, because we don't yet have a framework, to really engage with the purpose behind putting those issues there. For example, we always make very clear reference to financial implications of policies, but the level of detail that goes into the other implications is sometimes a little bit lacking. And I'm hoping that when we have this policy in place, along with the other policies, we will see officers given the opportunity to build a framework around much more detailed responses, so that all members can properly consider the impacts on various groups. However, I completely agree with you that the actual specifics there are not benign protected characteristics. It does appear that we do need to address a full understanding between all members of staff that social inequalities is not the phrase that we would use, and we will look carefully at making sure that we use the correct ones. And I would very much welcome if you would like to either meet with me or send me your details of your thoughts on that. I would be very happy to receive them. Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Members, that brings this evening's meeting to a close.